The morning, everything changed. October air in the little village of San Isidro, 30 kilometers from Merida, smelled of damp wood smoke and freshly roasted coffee. In a clay-walled kitchen with a thatched roof, Beatriz turned tortillas on the comal, her eyes watering from the smoke. Outside, among restless hens and pots of roux, her 5-year-old daughter Alma Sofia carefully lined up smooth stones, counting in whispers as if they were prayers. Her father, Tomas Morales, was in the corral, examining bundles of henequen, lost in thoughts of buyers' prices and the rain that had not come. It was an ordinary morning, woven from small rituals that gave the family a sense of safety. The wooden staircase leading to the loft creaked whenever the wind pressed against the house. Beatriz had asked Tomas more than once to replace the third step. It had been gnawed by termites, more memory than strength, but there was always something more urgent. That morning, Alma climbed the stairs to fetch a blue ribbon for her rag doll. Her small foot pressed on the weak step. The wood gave way. The sound of the fall was sharp, final. Beatrice's screams split the air. Alma's little body hit the stone floor, her hair spread like spilled ink. Tomas rushed inside his boots, leaving marks in the dust. Beatrice dropped to her knees, calling her daughter's name over and over. The girl did not answer. There was breath, faint and thin as a thread. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The neighbor, Doña Lucha, appeared with a glass of water and hurried words, but nothing seemed enough. The village doctor was in Merida, far away. Beatriz clutched a rosary and whispered every mystery twice, her voice trembling. 3 hours passed. The house was heavy with waiting, filled with the buzz of flies around fruit. Then Alma opened her eyes. It was not the confused gaze of a child waking from fainting. It was sharp, steady, like someone else had taken her place behind those eyes. She looked around as though she were measuring the room, as if she remembered walls that should not have been there. Beatriz sobbed with relief and reached for her, but Alma sat up slowly and spoke. "This is not my home," she said, clear and calm. "I want to go back to my true house in Chichén Itzá." Silence thickened the room. Tomas froze. Beatriz went pale and clutched the wooden cross from the wall. They had never spoken that name in front of Alma. She had no maps, no books. She was too young to know of ruins or temples. "Who told you that, my love?" Beatriz asked softly. Alma tilted her head as if listening to a voice only she could hear. "I have already lived there," she answered, and smiled with a sorrow far too old for 5 years. In the days that followed, Alma ate, slept, and walked as usual. No fever, no pain. Yet everything in her was altered, the way she held a cup, the way her eyes lingered on shadows, the way she paused as if remembering something just out of reach. One night, Beatriz heard her humming. At first it was a child's tune, then it became a chant, low and rhythmic, the syllables strange, older than Spanish, older than anything she had ever heard. The girl tapped her fingers on the bed frame, as if marking the phases of the moon. At dawn, Tomas found Alma in the courtyard, drawing on a flat stone with a piece of charcoal. They were not scribbles. They were forms, spirals, animal heads, eyes like almonds, jaguars, bands of stars. "What are you doing, Almida?" he asked, trying to sound cheerful. She did not look up. "These are words of stone," she said, "for the priests to read. This is how we keep what must not be forgotten." That same afternoon, Beatriz carried her to the church. The chapel of San Isidro, built over old stones, smelled of melted wax and damp walls. Father Mateo Vargas, tired eyes behind his spectacles, greeted them with polite warmth. Beatriz wasted no time. "Padre, since the accident, she speaks strangely. She says things she could not have heard at home." Alma, upon crossing the threshold, stopped. She stared at the altar, the saints, the ceiling. Her eyes glistened with sadness. "Here there used to be something else," she murmured. Stairs of stone rising into the winds. Serpents of light came down when the sun stood in balance. Father Mateo stiffened. Whispers of such things existed in old parish records, but hearing them from a child was unsettling. "And how do you know this, Hija?" he asked. Alma walked to the side wall, touched the plaster with her palm, and drew in the air an invisible sign, a jaguar descending. Beatrice gasped. Tomas's jaw tightened. The priest hesitated, then nodded. "Bring her tomorrow. I will look into the records. We shall talk again." That night Alma dreamt, or did not dream. She rose in silence and went out into the yard. The moon hung pale above the ceiba tree. The child stood in the center of the courtyard, arms wide, and began to sing. It was not a lullaby, not the chant of the night before. It was measured ritual naming stars, calling times. Beatrice, half asleep, wanted to wake Tomas, but could not move. She stood in the doorway, heart hammering, while Alma's voice wove through the darkness like something that belonged to another world. The next morning, San Isidro awoke to the usual chorus of roosters and the rattling of mule carts, but inside the Morales household, the atmosphere had shifted. Alma sat at the table, her small hands folded neatly, her gaze distant. When Beatrice placed a bowl of atole before her, the girl whispered a phrase no one understood. Syllables sharp, musical, flowing like water over stone. Tomas exchanged a troubled look with his wife. Beatrice crossed herself quickly, whispering a prayer under her breath. By mid-morning, they walked once more to the church. Father Mateo was waiting, his old leather-bound register open on the altar. He adjusted his spectacles, cleared his throat, and motioned for them to sit. "Last night, after you left, I searched the parish archives," he said, his voice grave. "There are notes very old about this place, about foundations of another temple beneath the chapel. But these were rumors fragments. And now your daughter—" He trailed off, staring at Alma. The girl walked to the altar without fear. She touched the carved wooden Christ and murmured something in the strange tongue. Father Mateo felt a chill run through him. He had heard bits of Yucatec Maya in confessions and village songs, but this was different, older, heavier. Alma turned to him with eyes that seemed far older than her years. "The codices are hidden," she said softly. "The ones that speak of the rain lords, the path of Venus, the jaguar of the underworld. I remember where they are." Tomas's face drained of color. Beatrice clutched her daughter's shoulders, shaking her gently. "Stop, Almita, please," she pleaded. But the girl's voice did not tremble. She spoke with certainty, like one reciting a memory. "When the fire came, when the strangers burned the books, we buried some in caves. I helped. My hands were not these hands, but they remember." Father Mateo inhaled sharply. His theological training told him to dismiss it as delirium. Yet part of him, his Mayan grandmother's blood, recognized echoes too precise to be invention. He felt torn between doctrine and something older than doctrine. "Tomas," he said cautiously, "your daughter must rest, but perhaps there is something here that deserves attention." Word of Alma's strange utterances began to ripple through San Isidro. The market women whispered while grinding maize. Children repeated phrases they half understood. Some elders nodded knowingly, muttering about souls returning. Others shook their heads, calling it dangerous, even blasphemous. Beatrice tried to shield her daughter, but Alma's presence was like firelight, impossible to hide. That evening, a visitor arrived at the Morales home. He was tall, fair-haired. his boots dusty from travel, his Spanish touched with a German accent. His name was Heinrich Bauer, an archaeologist who had been surveying ruins across Yucatan. Father Mateo had discreetly summoned him, intrigued by the possibility that the girl's words could connect to his research. Heinrich entered with politeness, his notebook always in hand. He observed Alma closely, not as a priest would, but as a man trained to chase fragments of history. "Little one," he said gently, kneeling to meet her eyes. "Tell me what you saw." Alma studied him in silence. Then, in a voice both childlike and solemn, she described a pyramid of stone where the sun sent down a serpent of light. She spoke of ceremonies, of painted walls of priests whose faces were covered in jade masks. Heinrich's hand trembled as he scribbled notes. Some details matched accounts he had read, but never shared aloud. She could not know these things, he muttered to Tomas. Not from books, not from stories told in this village. That night, Heinrich stayed as a guest. After supper, Alma sat by the hearth and began to hum. Slowly the hum grew into a chant, and then into precise words in an ancient form of Maya. Heinrich froze. He recognized them from fragments carved into stele at Chichén Itzá. The child's voice filled the room, rising and falling with ritual cadence. Beatriz wept softly, her hands clasped in prayer. Tomas sat rigid, torn between awe and fear. When the chant ended, Alma looked into the fire and whispered, "I am not supposed to be here this long. They are waiting for me." A silence heavier than stone settled over the room. The following day dawned with a haze that clung to the ceiba trees as though the village itself were holding its breath. Heinrich Bauer, notebook in hand, stood outside the Morales home, speaking quietly with Tomas. His German accent thickened when he grew excited, and now his words came fast, urgent. "You must understand," he insisted, "what your daughter said last night about the serpent of light. The codices this matches inscriptions I have studied. She speaks of things she cannot possibly know." Tomas, weary-eyed, rubbed his temples. "She is a child, Herr Bauer. My child. Since that fall, she speaks with a tongue that frightens us. My wife prays night and day. And you," he gestured helplessly, as though unable to decide if the foreigner was a blessing or a curse. Inside, Beatriz brushed Alma's hair, her fingers trembling. The girl sat calmly, gazing out the window. "Mama," she said suddenly, "he will need me to show the way." Beatriz froze. "Who, Niña?" she whispered. Alma's lips curved in a faint smile. "The man with papers? The one who does not believe, but must see." By noon they set out together, Heinrich, Tomas, and Alma, walking the narrow paths that led beyond the mill pass toward the low hills where jungle vines strangled abandoned walls. Beatrice refused to go. Her faith urged her to keep Alma away from what felt like forbidden ground. Yet she watched them disappear into the heat, shimmer her heart a tight knot of fear. The jungle grew thicker with each step. The air smelled of earth, and sap cicadas screamed overhead, and the sun was filtered into green shadows. Alma walked ahead without hesitation, as if the paths were known to her bones. She pointed once at a mound covered in brush. "There," she said. Heinrich's pulse quickened. Beneath the soil and vines lay cut stone visible where roots had torn the earth. It was no accident. They cleared the mound enough to see a stairway half-collapsed leading downward. Heinrich crouched to examine the carvings along a fallen block. His breath caught spiral stars, a jaguar's head. Symbols that matched none of the documented temples. "Mein Gott," he whispered. "This is untouched." Alma's eyes shone strangely in the dim light. "This is where we hid them," she said. before the fires, before the soldiers came. Tomas grabbed her arm. Enough. You are frightening me, Alma. You speak like an old ghost. His voice cracked. But Alma did not cry. She simply placed her small hand over his and said softly, Papa, I remember because I was there. Heinrich, shaking with awe, turned to Tomas. If this is true, if there are codices here, this could change everything we know about the Maya. Do you understand? These texts were thought destroyed forever. Reluctantly, they descended into the half-buried stairwell, guided by Alma's sure steps. The air grew cooler, damp, with centuries of silence. At the base lay a chamber walls carved with glyphs, their paint faded but still alive. Heinrich lit a lantern, its glow revealing bundles wrapped in bark paper sealed with resin. His hands trembled as he reached for them, reverent. These are codices, he breathed. Authentic, preserved. He looked at Alma, astonished. How? How could you possibly know? The girl pressed her palm to the wall. Because I once lived here, she murmured. When the sun was young and the people listened to the sky. I walked these halls before you were born, before your father's father was born. Tomas staggered back, the lantern light flickering across his stunned face. This is witchcraft, he whispered. No, Alma corrected gently. This is memory. The silence in that chamber pressed against them like a living thing. Somewhere above the jungle roared with life, but down here the past itself had awakened. That night, when they returned to the village, Heinrich could not stop pacing his notebook, already filled with sketches and translations. I must report this, he said. I must study these codices. But Alma shook her head. If you take them, they will disappear again. They belong to the earth, to the people. For the first time, Heinrich looked unsettled. He who had spent years chasing ruins suddenly wondered if some knowledge was not meant to be taken. The nights in San Isidro grew heavier after their discovery. The air seemed thicker, charged with a weight that pressed against the skin. Dogs barked at nothing, and old men muttered about restless spirits. Inside the Morales home, Alma often woke in the middle of the night, her small frame bathed in sweat, her eyes open wide, but not truly seeing. She whispered names Apuch Ikshel Kukulkan like prayers or warnings. Beatrice, terrified, pressed a damp cloth to her daughter's forehead, repeating rosaries until dawn. Heinrich, meanwhile, could hardly contain himself. By day, he sketched fragments from the codices they had uncovered, filling pages with glyphs that no scholar had seen intact. By night, he argued with himself in German, pacing the Morales courtyard. He wrote letters he never sent, torn between claiming the find for the academic world and fearing Alma's stern warnings. He felt trapped between glory and dread. Father Mateo was not at ease either. Each time he saw Alma, his priestly instincts clashed with his blood memory. His grandmother had once whispered of souls returning, of children carrying the breath of ancient kings. He had dismissed such stories until now. Watching Alma draw symbols in the dust with her finger, he felt both awe and a creeping sense of danger. One afternoon, Alma approached him outside the chapel. Padre, she said, her tone solemn, the writings speak of balance. When men take too much, the sky punishes. The fire, the drought, the sickness, they are not random. They are reminders. Father Mateo's throat tightened. Child, you must not speak of punishments. You will frighten people. They should be frightened, Alma replied, her eyes gleaming with an authority far too old for her face. The time will come again. The signs are already here. Word spread quickly in the village. Some said Alma was a seer blessed by God. Others whispered she was a vessel of the old gods, a danger wrapped in innocence. Mothers pulled their children away from her, while elders sought her presence, asking about their crops, their sick, their dreams. The more Alma spoke, the more divided the village became. Tomas, tormented, begged Heinrich to leave. "You fill her head with questions. You make this worse. My daughter needs peace, not these ghosts." But Alma herself defied him. "Papa," she said gently, "you do not understand. They chose me. I cannot be silent." One evening, Heinrich convinced Tomas and Father Mateo to return to the chamber with him. Alma led, again sure-footed in the darkness. This time she went directly to a wall she had not touched before. She traced the outline of a serpent swallowing its tail, then pressed her palm firmly against the stone. The wall shifted, revealing a narrow passage choked with rubble. Inside lay another chamber, smaller, its walls painted with frescoes, still vibrant beneath centuries of dust. The images showed a city bathed in fire temples, crumbling, people fleeing. Over the destruction loomed a star with a flaming tail. Heinrich's hand shook as he sketched. "A comet," he whispered. They recorded a comet. Alma turned to him, her face solemn. "It is not only of the past. It is of what may come. The sky will burn again unless balance is kept." Father Mateo crossed himself, muttering prayers. Tomas pulled Alma close, desperate to silence her. But the child's words lingered like an echo that could not be buried. That night, Heinrich sat awake under the Kaaba, staring at the stars. For the first time he felt the weight of what Alma carried, not only the memory of a past life, but perhaps a warning meant for their own. He whispered into the darkness, "What if she is right?" And from inside the house, Alma's voice answered softly, though she had been thought asleep. "I am not right, Herr Bauer. I only remember." The words froze him where he sat, his notebook slipping from his fingers. The days that followed were heavy with tension. San Isidro no longer felt like the quiet village Heinrich had first arrived to study near. It pulsed with rumors, half-believed prophecies, and fear that clung to every corner. At the market, women who once pinched Alma's cheeks now made the sign of the cross when she passed. Men spoke in low tones, saying a child should not know the things she knew. A few whispered darker words, "Bruja maldición." Tomas bore the weight of this mistrust like a stone on his back. He could not walk through the plaza without hearing mutters about his daughter. At night he sat in silence, staring at the floor, while Beatrice prayed louder than ever, as if her voice could shield Alma from the world's judgment. Yet the child herself seemed untouched by fear. Her eyes shone with a calm far older than her years, and each day she spoke with greater certainty. One afternoon, Heinrich returned from the site pale and unsettled. He carried sheets of paper filled with glyphs he had copied. These writings, he told Father Mateo and Tomas, speak of a cycle, a great turning of time. They describe droughts, wars, even the fall of dynasties. And always they mention the return of a child who remembers. His hands trembled as he held the pages. They describe her. Father Mateo slammed his fist on the table. "Enough! You speak as if the words of pagans outweigh the word of God. She is a child, nothing more." Yet his voice betrayed doubt, for each time Alma spoke in that ancient cadence, his faith wavered. Alma walked into the room, her dress smudged with earth, her hair tangled from playing under the teba. She looked at the men, her gaze steady. The codices were hidden to survive, not to be carried away. "If you take them, Herr Bauer, they will vanish again. They belong to the land." Heinrich swallowed hard. He had dreamed of a discovery like this all his career, but in the girl's voice was a gravity he could not dismiss. Alma, he said softly. Then what must be done? She turned her head toward the horizon where the sun sank blood-red into the jungle. The words must be spoken aloud once more under the sky. Only then will the cycle know we remember. That night the village gathered by the ceiba tree, despite their fears. Some came out of curiosity, others out of dread, and a few because hope flickered in their hearts. Heinrich stood among them, lantern in hand, while Father Mateo lingered at the edge, torn between faith and fear. Tomas held Beatriz tightly, though their eyes remained fixed on their daughter. Alma stepped into the clearing, her small figure haloed by firelight. She lifted her arms and began to chant, her voice weaving ancient syllables that rolled like thunder. The sound was unlike any hymn the villagers knew. Yet it stirred something deep in their blood. As she spoke, the night wind rose, rustling the ceiba's leaves, and the stars above seemed to burn brighter. Heinrich scribbled furiously, then stopped, realizing the futility of ink and paper. The moment was not meant for possession, but for witness. Even Father Mateo, lips trembling, fell to his knees, whispering fragments of prayers that tangled with Alma's chant. When the final word left her lips, the air stilled. For a long moment, the jungle held its breath. Then Alma lowered her arms, her eyes soft again, the weight of centuries gone from her face. She turned to her parents, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Now I can rest." Beatrice rushed forward, gathering her child in trembling arms. Tomas pressed his forehead against hers, weeping openly. The villagers dispersed slowly, each person carrying a silence they could not explain. Some believed they had witnessed a miracle, others a curse, but none could deny that something beyond their understanding had passed through them. Heinrich, shaken to his core, closed his notebook and placed it gently on the ground. He would not publish what he had seen, nor carry away the codices. Some knowledge, he realized, was not meant to be captured, but remembered alive, in the voice of a child under the stars. That night, Alma slept peacefully, for the first time since her fall. The strange language no longer passed her lips, and in the morning she rose with the innocence of any 5-year-old, her memory of the ritual gone. But for those who had stood beneath the ceiba, the memory remained. The weeks after the ritual passed, with an uncanny quiet. San Isidro returned to its rhythms, the market stalls opened, mule carts rattled down dusty roads. The bells of the chapel tolled on Sundays. But for those who had stood beneath the ceiba tree, nothing felt the same. The memory of Alma's chant lingered like smoke that clings to the skin, impossible to wash away. Alma herself seemed untouched. She laughed again, played with her muñeca de trapo, ran after chickens in the courtyard. When neighbors asked her about the strange words she had once spoken, she tilted her head in confusion. I don't remember, she would say, her voice light, her eyes bright. And it was true. Whatever had passed through her had left as suddenly as it came, leaving only the child she had always been. For Beatrice and Tomas, relief mixed with sorrow. Relief that their daughter once again slept through the night, that the whispers in the village grew softer. Sorrow because they knew she had carried something vast and mysterious, and now it was gone from her reach. Beatrice sometimes woke in the dark, pressing her ear to Alma's chest just to hear the steady beat of her small heart, as if afraid the ancient voice might return and take her away. Heinrich Bauer remained in San Isidro longer than he had planned. Each morning he walked the jungle paths alone, stopping often at the half-buried stairway. The codices still lay hidden in their chamber, untouched since the night Alma led them there. More than once he was tempted to take them to ship them back to Europe, to make his name immortal in the world of archaeology. But then he remembered Alma's steady gaze, the weight of her words. They belonged to the land. He could not betray that truth. Instead, he wrote in his journal at night careful descriptions of what he had seen. but he kept the location secret, guarded like a sacred vow. Father Mateo grew graver with each passing day. He continued his duties, baptisms, confessions, funerals. But in the silence of the chapel, he wrestled with what he had witnessed. The church taught him to denounce the old gods as false, yet the memory of Alma chanting beneath the stars filled him with awe too deep to dismiss. At times he wondered if God's hand might be broader than the boundaries of Rome, if the soul could carry memories across lifetimes. Such thoughts unsettled him, yet they would not leave. Years passed. Alma grew into a spirited young woman, her childhood strangeness remembered only by a few. She never again spoke the old tongue, never again spoke of pyramids or fire serpents. She married Boer children, lived a life of ordinary joys and sorrows. To her parents, she remained simply their beloved daughter, though sometimes in quiet moments, Tomas swore he saw in her eyes a flicker of the ancient gaze he could never forget. Heinrich eventually left Yucatan, returning to Europe with his notes, but without the treasures other scholars expected him to send. His peers dismissed his reports as fanciful, unverified. He accepted their scorn in silence, preferring obscurity to betrayal. Yet in his private papers, he wrote one final line beneath his sketches of the codices: "The truth lives not in books, but in memory." I saw it once in the voice of a child. Father Mateo grew old in San Isidro, his hair silver, his back bent. On his deathbed, he confessed to his successor that he had once seen a miracle, a girl who carried the voice of centuries. "Do not bury the story," he urged. "Tell it in whispers if you must, so the people remember." His words became another layer of rumor folded into the fabric of village tales. Alma lived to old age, never knowing the weight she had carried as a child. But the villagers who had heard her chant beneath the Teba never forgot. And when the comet appeared decades later, streaking across the Yucatan sky, those who still remembered shivered and bowed their heads, recalling the prophecy of balance. The codices remain hidden, sealed in the earth, guarded by silence. Yet the story survives of a 5-year-old girl who once claimed she had lived before in the shadow of Chichén Itzá, when the sun was young and the gods still walked among men. Decades later, long after Alma had passed peacefully in her sleep, far from the whispers that once followed her in childhood, her story was nearly forgotten outside San Isidro. The village had grown into a larger town, paved roads and electric wires creeping into places where the ceiba trees once stood alone. The old chapel had been rebuilt, the market bustling with merchants from Merida. Children played without knowing that once a girl no older than themselves had chanted words that echoed the voice of centuries. But far away in a damp library in Munich, a trunk was opened. Inside lay the papers of Heinrich Bauer, yellowed with age, their ink faded but still legible. He had died quietly in the 1930s, remembered by colleagues as a competent archaeologist, but not extraordinary. Yet his private journals told another story, sketches of glyphs unseen by modern eyes, descriptions of codices hidden deep in the Yucatan, and most haunting of all accounts of a 5-year-old girl who spoke in the language of the ancients. A graduate student named Clara Hoffman stumbled upon the trunk while cataloging archives. She expected field notes, lists of artifacts, perhaps letters. Instead, she found page after page of words that seemed half scientific, half mystical. At first, she dismissed them as Bauer's fevered imagination. But the drawings caught her breath, symbols she recognized from recently discovered stele details that no European could have known at the time. Her professor scoffed when she showed him the notes. A child prophet nonsense. Bauer must have been duped by local superstition. Yet Clara could not let it go. She began researching, tracing Bauer's path through Yucatan, uncovering mentions of San Isidro in missionary records. She even found a faded letter from a priest, Father Mateo, hinting at a miracle that could not be spoken of openly. Word spread quietly among scholars. Some dismissed it as folklore. Others were intrigued, whispering about the Bauer papers at conferences, debating whether hidden codices might still lie buried where Alma once led them. Expeditions were proposed, but always faltered. The location remained obscure, shrouded in ambiguity. In San Isidro, the older generation still remembered. When Clara eventually traveled there, she was welcomed politely, though, with suspicion. An old woman, Maria Alma's granddaughter, told her fragments of the story. My abuela was normal, she insisted. She cooked, she sewed, she prayed. But sometimes when she looked at the stars, I thought she knew them better than anyone else. Clara pressed for details, but Maria shook her head. She never spoke of the old language. Only once when I was a girl, she told me, "We are not only who we are now. We are who we have been before." Then she smiled and said no more. That night, Clara walked to the edge of the town, where a massive ceiba tree still grew its roots like stone serpents clutching the earth. Villagers warned her not to linger there after dark, for it was said to be a threshold between worlds. She stood beneath its vast branches, reading aloud from Bauer's notes, her voice trembling as she repeated words she did not understand. The air stirred. The leaves whispered. And for an instant, Clara felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, the past pressing close, listening. She shut the notebook quickly, her heart hammering. She could not prove what Alma had been, could not prove the codices still lay hidden, but she understood now why Bauer had kept the secret. Some truths were not meant to be owned. They were meant to be remembered, carried in whispers, in stories, in the gaze of a child who once sang to the stars. And so, the tale lived on half history, half legend. A 5-year-old girl in a forgotten village in 1903 who claimed she had lived in Chichén Itzá before, when the sun was young and time was a circle. The story passed from generation to generation, never fully believed, never fully denied. And when the comet returned to the Yucatan sky in a later century, blazing white across the heavens, those who remembered bowed their heads once more, hearing in its fire the echo of a voice that once said, "I only remember."